For the first time in over 120 years of operation, the Chattanooga Police Department began to pay overtime during the 1970s, and officers got plenty of opportunities to earn their pay. Only a few months after dealing with racial tensions at Brainerd High School, police were facing a citywide disorder. It was the riot of '71, a massive civil disturbance touched off by the failure of an entertainer to perform a concert.
It seems that Wilson Pickett had demanded his money before he performed, and the promoters had instructed that he was not to be paid until after he performed. When they refused to pay him, he then walked off the stage and told people to get their money back. Thereafter, there ensued a demand for the money, and they were trying to refund the money on the tickets as fast as they could. It didn't seem to be fast enough. They broke into the box office, stole unissued tickets, and then whenever they started presenting those, they cut off the refunding. There was a rampage through downtown, and then we had several difficult days of establishing order back here.
There was sniper fire, rock and bottle throwing, window smashing, and a firebombing that demolished radio station WNOO. 141 people were arrested Saturday morning, but even that didn't put down the rebellion. That afternoon, Mayor Walker declared a state of emergency and called on state and county police and the National Guard to help restore order to the troubled city. A 7 p.m. curfew was placed in effect, forcing factories to shut down their nighttime operations and airlines to cancel flights to and from the city. Chattanooga became a ghost town after dark, and it stayed that way until May 29th, 7 days later, when National Guard troops left the city and the curfew was lifted. That same year, Amos and Andy Buick, a car dealership, was firebombed after a union's attempt to organize mechanics. David Halpenny, Jr., president of the local Teamsters 515, was arrested, along with his business manager, Oda Thomas. The pair was convicted and sentenced to prison. In January of 1972, it wasn't arson, but carelessness that led to a fire at Eastgate Mall that caused $2 million worth of damage to 22 businesses. That same month, an 8-year-old girl was beaten to death by her stepfather, Clyde LaChance of Chattanooga. LaChance was convicted of the crime, but had his sentence reduced by the State Court of Criminal Appeals. In 1975, the Tennessee Supreme Court reinstated his 99-year sentence, calling the crime reprehensible, loathsome, barbarous, repulsive, and abominable. In the fall of '72, residents of the Bonnie Oaks area were knocked out of bed when a spark ignited gasoline at a huge tank farm. Threats of more explosions lingered for days while firefighters battled the persistent blaze. And who can forget the hijacking of a Southern Airways jet in November of '72? After flying over most of the eastern United States and parts of Canada, 3 gunmen landed the plane for refueling at Chattanooga's Level Field. The hijackers, threatening to crash the plane into a nuclear facility, successfully extorted $2 million from Southern Airways and then flew the jet to Cuba. In 1973, the contract killing of a South Pittsburgh man was traced to Billy Hull. The former nightclub owner is pictured here following his release from jail after posting bond. Hull was convicted of the murder of Roland Hargis, and he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. In 1973, an evening turned into tragedy for an elderly Chattanooga couple. While waiting for friends in a restaurant parking lot, Mr. and Mrs. Charles McAtee were robbed and then abducted by 4 teenaged boys. Mrs. McAtee was raped and murdered. Mr. McAtee was seriously injured. In November of that year, 38 passengers and crew members were hurt when a Delta jet crashed at Level Field during a heavy rainstorm. The Federal Aviation Administration later determined that pilot error had caused the crash of the DC-9. The next summer, there was another crash, this time a light plane, carrying TV personality and congressional candidate Mort Lloyd. Lloyd was killed in that accident. His wife, Marilyn, took up his gauntlet and went on to become Congresswoman for Tennessee's 3rd District. The eyes of the nation focused upon Chattanooga in the summer of '74 when an explosion and fire rocked the core of 9th Street's nightclub district. The force of the blast so great that bricks were hurled across the street with enough impact to collapse a wall. 1 man was killed, damages estimated at $1 million. National Guard troops were again called into the city to maintain law and order. 4 years later, 3 men, Samuel Pettyjohn, Earl Nickerson, and Bernard Ramsey, were arrested in connection with the explosion just 13 days before the statute of limitations would expire. The trial date for the 3 was set for 1979, but Pettyjohn never lived to come to trial. In February of this year, he was killed in an execution-style slaying at his liquor store on Market Street. Ramsey and Nickerson were tried, however, both acquitted. The same day of that 9th Street explosion, a tank car carrying dangerous chlorine gas derailed in Alton Park at the site of the Belsicol Chemical Corporation. 200 firemen and rescue squad members were called to the scene to carry out evacuation orders and seal off the area. No leak was discovered, however, and the next day the car was righted onto its tracks. 1974 came to a close with arrests for 3 murders in the Chattanooga area. Jackie Renner Robinson and Kenneth Stanley King were tried and convicted for the murder of Dr. Robert Elliott, a local dentist, who was abducted and later found shot to death in the trunk of his car. Both King and Robinson are currently on death row at Tennessee State Prison. And Action News has learned that Robinson has been re-indicted for another murder as well. 3 people were arrested for the murder of 2 teenagers, Rick Spencer and Steve Cannon, whose partially decomposed bodies were found in a shallow grave at a rifle club. Both had been shot to death at the grave site. The mid-1970s brought to our area an increasing use and abuse of illegal drugs. And Chattanooga, it appeared, was the distribution point. This DC-3 was carrying $1.4 million worth of marijuana in its belly when police confiscated it in September of '74. It was just one of many pot planes which would land in Chattanooga, and these people were just a few out of hundreds arrested in the '70s for various drug offenses. In 1977, the nation's attention focused on Athens, Tennessee, during the trial of Ronald and Wanda Maddox. The couple was accused and later convicted of the child abuse and murder of their daughter, Militia. The circumstances surrounding the death of Militia Gibson triggered emotionalism throughout our area and caused sweeping reform in the way agencies deal with family services in cases where child abuse is suspected. That same year, an explosion rocked the Beth Shalom Synagogue, only hours from a time when the building would be packed with innocent people. And at Main and Market Streets, another explosion that leveled a 2-square block. The 5-story Siskin building, which had housed a branch of the First Tennessee Bank, looked like a shattered structure from an earthquake movie. The building's owners sued Chattanooga Gas Company, claiming leaking natural gas caused the multi-million-dollar destruction. In October of this year, a mistrial was declared when the jury told the judge it was deadlocked. As we neared the end of the decade, police officers were acutely reminded of the hazards of their jobs as 4 officers died in the line of duty. Clarence Hamler was fatally shot in 1977 while trying to stop a robbery in progress. Nick Hess and David Fredrickson were shot to death in 1978 while answering a disorder call to a Brainerd residence. And in Catoosa County, Georgia, Baxter Shavers was gunned down while he searched a robbery suspect. In April of 1979, Herman Geismer, a Chattanooga liquor store owner, was shot and killed at his place of business. And a maintenance man at a Cleveland mall was stabbed to death during a robbery attempt. And the longest standoff ever faced by the Chattanooga Police Department SWAT team ended after 30 hours in July of this year when 50-year-old Wyman Whitty released his wife, whom he'd been holding hostage, and surrendered to police. And in October of '79, a major drug conspiracy trial in Chattanooga ended with acquittal of 4 of the accused: Herschel Hawkins, Thomas Woods, Michael Boyd, and Frank Henderson, Jr. The 5th person, Sam Benford, was convicted of possession of heroin and sentenced to 6 months in prison and a fine of $1,000. As we end the decade, though, area law enforcement officials are reeling from the sweet smell of success. After pulling off several sting operations in several counties, police netted several $1 million worth of stolen property and arrests of those responsible for the thefts. The 15th of this month, the Hamilton County Sheriff's Department ended its investigation of what's being called the largest recovery of stolen goods in Tennessee's history.
Thanks for making News Channel 9 your trusted source for local news. For updates and the latest on breaking news, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications.